Alright guys, Bill here back with a new video, and in this video, I'm back with another cast reaction to a challenge cast where here we'll be talking about the cast of the Challenge 40, which is obviously this big landmark season of the show, to where obviously with that you can expect a really all-star lineup here, and I will say straight up, I am shocked at how good this cast is. For recently the Challenge has been a show where I've very much qualmed with their casting decisions. I was always perplexed at who exactly they were bringing back, and while there's certainly still those people, I'm actually genuinely surprised at how well this season was cast. Not just in terms of the actual people who were brought back, but also in terms of the general theme, where I will say I am very excited for Challenge 40 after seeing this group of people. I feel like the Challenge 40 here, with the theme of it being the best of the best, which again, you can qualm with some people on there, but it also being era-based, where it seems like they went out of their way to get, again, a 40-person cast for Season 40. Obviously a larger number than normal, but beyond that, having 10 players from each era of the show, from each respective grouping of 10 seasons, that's a pretty insane thing to do. Again, people have talked about for a lot of these shows about wanting an old school versus new school season, and I myself have done an old school versus new school casting video for the challenge, and this is pretty much that, but on steroids. It is essentially a old school versus new school season where they actually deliberately took the time to specifically cast the same amount of people from respective groups within that old school versus new school delineation. It's actually pretty insane the amount of care that seemed to be put into this cast. Now, obviously you can qualm the fact that a lot of the people that are on this cast are people that have been on the challenge in some form within the last few years. Only a few of these players have not been on either the main show or on All Stars in the last few years. To where, again, ideally, yeah, we would have had a bit more different people, but I still think, considering the group that we got, this is an extremely stacked cast. One of the most stacked casts, if not the most stacked cast in challenge history, while also just having most of the people you would want. I really feel like when looking at the field and looking at the people that are considered to be the best of the best, that would actually say yes, I feel like they succeeded in getting most of those people. There are definitely some big names missing, but again, I'm pretty confident those people were asked and said no. I think of the people that they could have gotten, I feel like they got pretty much most of the big names that are on the board. But again, with that, let's talk about the cast itself, and I think I'll be running through them in relation to their respective eras, talking about them in alphabetical order within that. So obviously we'll start off with Era 1, Seasons 1 through 10, again, all players that debuted within that range, which again is cool to see all these old schoolers back. Now again, all these people have been back since All Stars, but again, still cool nonetheless. Now we'll say I do also want to run through the alternates of the cast because we do know them as well, so I might as well. The alternates for Era 1 are Ruthie, who I will say a little bit surprised she didn't make the cast, where again, if you're considering Ruthie, I do feel like Ruthie was such a big name back then that would make sense to put her on the proper cast in the season that is, again, is supposed to be the celebration of the series. Now, again, I'm not dying for a Ruthie return. I feel like Ruthie has kind of been a dud the last few times she's been on the show, but I do think she's still a big enough name to where I would not be opposed to her being there, but also not shocked that she's not there. The other alternate is Cyrus, who I'm fine with how I feel like Cyrus has been an alternate on many seasons recently and has made it on, but has never really provided that much, even though I do like Cyrus. He definitely isn't OG of the show, but he's just someone that I don't particularly need on the show at this point. So again, I'm kind of fine with him there or without him. But again, now let's run to the actual people that were on. Where obviously we're starting it off with a bang. We got Anissa, obviously. And again, I don't need Anissa on the challenge anymore. Though I do feel like, again, for Season 40, this big landmark season, Anissa is obviously one of the biggest names in the challenge, to where it makes sense that she's here. Did I want her back? Not really. Do I expect her to go far? Probably. Do I expect her to be that fun on the show? Probably not. But I still think, again, in terms of respecting the legacy of the series, I feel like Anissa's someone that kind of had to be there. Next up, we got Brad. And again, it's cool to see Brad back on the mainline series. I mean, he's been on, obviously, most of the All-Star seasons, so it's not like we haven't seen him in a while. But again, cool to see him on 40. Now, again, we did see him on 39, and he did not look great on 39. To where I'm not really expecting Brad to do particularly well, but again, another really big name, so cool to see back on the mainline show. Then we obviously got one of the biggest names on the board. Finally returning, we do got CT, who obviously was going to be here. I mean, he pretty much announced it back in Shot 39, and even then when he said that he was going to take a hiatus from the show, I was pretty confident he was going to come back for 40, but still, CT being here, cool. We'll see how it goes. I think CT's actually going to have a bit of a tough ride in the sense that he obviously just won his last 2 seasons. He's won 3 of his last 4 seasons. And I think this is actually a cast that doesn't really favor him. I think he's actually someone that is greatly benefited from being with the newer crop of competitors who have a lot of respect for him and are scared of him. Well, I feel like this being a cast that there's a lot of people he hasn't played with in a while, I think is actually a pretty dangerous spot for him, where I do think he's going to be targeted, but still someone that is, again, massive name. Really happy to see him back. Next up, we got Darrell. And again, obviously Darrell is going to be here. And again, while Darrell hasn't really provided much in his last few appearances on the show, I'm perfectly fine with him being here. I do think, again, needed to be here if you're going to embrace the history of the series. Was such a big name from back in the day, and is someone that's still willing to come back over and over again. So again, I think he's someone that makes a lot of sense for this cast. Next up, we got Derek K. And similar thing, again, I didn't particularly need Derek K. I feel like I'm kind of over his shtick to a degree, to where he's not someone that I need to see on challenge seasons anymore. Though again, I think for Challenge 40, it makes a lot of sense that he's here. Again, another person that was a big name back in the day, and someone that, again, I'm not really looking at as someone that's really that big of a threat to win this season. But again, someone that I think, again, in this cast of the best, I do think Derek is someone that makes a lot of sense that he's here. So again, perfectly fine in this casting choice as well. Next up, we do got Jody. And Jody, again, kind of insane that we're seeing Jody on the mainline season again. I mean, we did obviously see her on All-Stars 2, and we saw her on World Championship, but her to be back here, pretty cool. Even though, again, I don't find her to be the most riveting TV in any way. But again, another big name on the board. One that's constantly talked about as one of the best female challenge competitors. And again, to see her face off against the best of the best is just a cool concept. So again, cool to see her here. Next up, we got one of the bigger question marks in my mind. That person is Katie Doyle, who obviously is a massive icon of the show. Really great character. Very questionable, her being on Challenge 40. Not in the sense that, like, she doesn't have this big legacy on the show. She obviously does. And I think just for that, it makes sense that she's here. But she's someone that has never really been that interested in playing the game of the challenge. And someone that is very clearly not going to do particularly well, to where I do find it weird that they cast her here. So while I think she's better TV than Ruthie, I actually think Ruthie may have been the better choice for this spot. And even beyond that, I would have preferred someone like Veronica, though obviously the assumption is she turned it down. But still, I think Katie's kind of a weird choice here, but someone that obviously is still a massive name in the show. It's where I'm not upset at her being here. It's just, it does feel like a kind of a random choice. Next up, moving on to someone I'm personally excited to see on the flagship show again. That person's Mark Long, who obviously we've seen on All-Stars 1 and 3. He's been back recently, but again, to see Mark Long be on the main show again is kind of insane. I think that is a really interesting prospect, and Mark Long is someone that, again, very likely is going to make the final again, as he normally does. Even though realistically, I don't think he has any shot of actually winning that final. But again, someone that's cool to see here. Again, the godfather of the show, has a massive legacy on the show. So again, really cool to see him back. Next up, another really big name here. We got Rachel Robinson. And again, kind of insane that we're seeing Rachel Robinson on the mainline show again after so many years. Now, obviously, she was just on All-Stars 4. Or again, it's not that shocking that she would accept for 40. But still, really cool to get a big name like this back on the show. Again, I feel like another of the best to be added to the board here. So again, really cool to see Rachel back. And the final person for Era 1 is Tina. And Tina is weird to me that she's here. I feel like it's kind of random for her to be on Challenge 40. Now, it's still cool. Again, like Katie, I think it makes sense. Obviously a major character in Challenge history, but also kind of random. Like, again, I do feel like she's someone that obviously doesn't fit the moniker of best of the best. Again, she's never been the greatest challenge competitor, even though obviously she had a very good run in Fresh Meat. Or at least like Katie is like a former winner. Tina's not even that. Though, again, it's still a good character to where, again, it should be interesting to see her here, but she's someone that I was never really on my board of someone that I actually thought was actually going to make the cast. But with that, let's now move on to Era 2, where the alternates here, starting off with someone that is a pretty big surprise to me in that they're an alternate. That person is Carly, who obviously is the winner of Fresh Meat 2, and someone that I would be really excited to see back on this season. Now, straight up, I think when looking at the Era 2 women, I think it makes sense that she's an alternate. I think it's a very stacked grouping to where I don't know where she really fits in that, but I think it's still disappointment that they actually got her this close to being on the mainline show again, and she just simply didn't make the cut. And the other person that's an alternate is Big Easy. Because why not? I mean, like, straight up, I don't dislike Big Easy. I know he's someone that people are very negative on typically. And again, I was personally happy to see him back on All-Stars 1. I did like seeing his redemption arc there. And while he's someone that doesn't really have much of a chance of actually winning a season in the grand scheme of things, I would not be opposed to him being back here. And probably actually would rather have him back than this or another person that made the proper cast. So again, I actually don't mind Big Easy, but I'm also not upset at the fact that he's an alternate. Though I think straight up, the Era 2 men is probably probably the weakest portion of this cast, despite the fact that the Era 2 women are really strong. But again, with that, let's talk about the people on the cast itself. Starting it off with probably one of the bigger shockers on the board, we do have Aviv, who I believe is the furthest back person on the proper cast itself, having not played since Fresh Meat 1, which is insane. And she is back here also with Darrell, who she won that season with, which is cool. And again, it's cool to see Aviv back on the show. Now, again, I probably would have been more shocked if she had not been more involved in the community more recently, to where it did feel like she was popping up a bit more, to where it's not like she completely came out in left field, but still really cool to see her back on the mainline season 28 seasons later. Again, it's gonna be pretty insane to see that, even though I don't know how well it will actually go for her, but definitely one of the bigger surprises on the board here. And again, when we're going back to Carly, like, I think when you're looking at the people that made the cast here, it's either her or Carly, and I think picking Aviv over Carly makes sense. So again, in an ideal world, you would obviously have both of them. Next up, we're moving on to Brandon, and straight up, I am really shocked that Brandon made the cut here. I feel like Brandon is someone that I would not have expected to be on Challenge 40, to where, again, to me, he feels like someone that should be an alternate, though I'm fine with it. I like Brandon. I've always liked him on his original runs. I know he's coming back for All-Stars 4, obviously. We know he was an alternate on previous All-Star seasons, to where, again, he's been in the running for a while, and again, for him to come back for Challenge 40 is cool, but he's still, like, of a caliber that doesn't feel like he needs to be on this cast, or there's other people I probably would have preferred more, though. Again, when looking at the Era 2 men, I think they probably just struggled with finding people, to where, again, like, once you're not getting the best of the best, I feel like Brandon is a pretty decent choice. Next up, moving on to probably one of my most anticipated people, obviously we got Cara Maria, who, again, I love Cara Maria. She's probably my favorite challenge competitor. To where obviously she just recently came back for All-Stars 4, and again, her coming back for 40, which is kind of inevitability. So really cool to see her back here. Really excited to see how it goes. I think it'll be an interesting spot here where, I mean, just in general, with this entire cast, there's a lot of history between a lot of these people, good and bad. And Cara Maria obviously has a lot of that, to where, again, it'll just be interesting to see how this all plays out. Next up, moving on to Derek Chavez, who is another one of the more random picks on the board. Now, I will say, in comparison to another person we'll be talking about, I think I would rather have Derek than that other person, though Derek is still a question mark. I don't really get why he's here. I mean, again, I just feel like they probably struggle with finding Era 2 men. And again, I'd probably rather even have Derek here than Big Easy, but he's someone that I'm not looking at as that poised to do well in the long term. Now, again, I think he's actually coming into this decently positioned socially, where he has a decent amount of allies here, but I really do feel like he's going to be outclassed physically on this season, but still someone that I do like, so at least there's that. Next up, another one of the bigger names on the board, we do have Emily, who, again, has been in the rumor mill. Not surprising she's actually back here. And she is a massive threat to win this game. I mean, obviously, she is someone that's constantly talked about as one of the best challenge competitors of all time. For a while, she's made very few appearances on the show. The appearances she has made have been extremely strong, to where I do feel like Emily is someone that, had she continued competing, would have been one of the most decorated women in challenge history. And again, I think she's a serious threat to win this season. I think she's definitely in my top tier of potential winners on the women's side of things. Now, again, don't know what that means for a TV product, where she's not particularly interesting. She's kind of a boring personality, and beyond that, she also has like a bit of ickiness in her challenge career, to where, again, you could definitely call those aspects of her being back, but I do think if you're getting the best of the best, I do feel like Emily is a pretty good choice here. Next up, we got Johnny Bananas, obviously. Obviously, there was no doubt that he was going to be here. And straight up, I don't think this is a particularly good cast for Bananas. I think this is one where it does feel like one he's going to be targeted by the end, where I don't really have much faith in Bananas long-term on this season, but obviously he was going to be on this season. Next up, we do have Kellyanne, and I'm actually pretty excited to see Kellyanne here, to where obviously Kellyanne has been making more recent appearances recently. She was in All-Stars 1 and 3. She was also on World Championship, which was a bit of a train wreck of a run. But again, she's someone that could potentially make for good TV here. Again, one that kind of cracks under pressure, and that's kind of interesting to see. Even beyond that, she's someone that, again, is at least playing the game. She does try to make these moves when she's on the bottom, and again, at least that's interesting to see. And again, like, seeing Kellyanne back on the mainline show after a decent hiatus is also cool to see, where, again, like, just in general, I'm happy to see Kellyanne here. So while I did, this is a spot that obviously could have gone to Carly, who would have been a very interesting person to see on this cast as well. I do feel like Kellyanne taking this slot is also not a bad pick in my mind. So again, I'm perfectly fine with her being here. Next Next up, we got Laurel, because obviously, again, there was never a doubt for me that Laurel was going to be on this cast, and obviously seeing her back with Cara Maria, which, I mean, to be fair, obviously they're on All Stars 4 together, but seeing them back on the mainline show again, especially now that they seem to have a pretty decent relationship, is going to be interesting. And even beyond that, again, this is the best of the best, and you can't have that without Laurel, arguably the best female competitor of all time. So obviously, Laurel's just such a big name that you had to have her on this cast. Next up, moving on to Nehemiah, and I mean, outside Bananas, I feel like Nehemiah is probably the next best guy in the Era 2 grouping here, where again, the men are not the greatest here, but Nehemiah, again, I'm fine with him being here. I do like Nehemiah. He's someone that, while he's a bit hammy in his recent challenge appearances, I think he's made for decent TV, and again, he is a decent competitor. I think of the people that were on All Stars, he's the person that I always looked at as the person that could have made their transition back to the mainline show and not really miss a beat. So again, I'm personally fine with Nehemiah being here. I think it's a pretty decent choice, and considering, again, him also being a former winner and him having boosted his legacy more recently, I feel like he's someone that is perfectly suited for this cast. The final person from Era 2 is Ryan, for some reason. I don't know why. Again, Ryan is like probably the biggest question mark on this entire cast for me, of like legitimately why. Like, I don't dislike Ryan necessarily, but I don't think he's particularly interesting TV, and he's also not someone that's gonna do well on the show, to where I just don't know why he's here. Where again, like, I actually think Big Easy is a better casting choice than Ryan, or at least Big Easy is like obviously different body type wise, to where at least he stands out that way, and even then at least has a redemption arc to a degree, to where like Ryan is just there and just kind of enables the majority in a way that isn't interesting to watch. So I don't know why he's here. I do feel like this is, again, the most questionable casting choice on this entire cast for me, to where I'm not particularly excited that he's on this cast. But with that, we then move on to Era 3, where the alternates here are Jasmine, which is kind of random. Where, again, if this is the best of the best, I don't know, Jasmine is someone I would have been considering, though. Again, she obviously is a big character. So, like, if she somehow made it on through someone else dropping out, it's like, whatever. But she's not someone I'm, like, dying to see on Challenge 40. And the same thing goes with the male alternate in Jay, which it's like, also why? I mean, obviously, this is an indication of how they feel about him after All Stars 4, but still, someone I'm not particularly excited to see here. So again, kind of fine with him being an alternate. Now, I should mention that at the time of this recording, we do only have 9 officially confirmed people from Era 3, with the missing guy here being the only person that is not officially confirmed. However, it is very much implied that that person is Jordan, which would obviously make a lot of sense. Jordan is obviously the reigning world champion, and obviously someone that is widely considered one of the best players of all time, to where Jordan being here would obviously be a big get here, adding to the prestige of this cast. While I'm not the biggest Jordan fan, I do feel like, again, for a season that's supposed to be the best of the best, not having Jordan there would obviously be a big loss for that style of cast. So again, I'm perfectly fine with him being on a season like this in particular. With that, let's talk about the rest of the Era 3 people, starting it off with Amanda, who I've always liked. Amanda is probably one of my favorite challenge competitors, just because I find her really entertaining. Now, again, don't think she's gonna win the show or anything, but she has some moments where she surprises people. For, well, again, not the greatest challenge competitor in the world. I feel like I'm fine with her being here, even though she doesn't really fit into the moniker of best of the best. But with that, we then get to Avery, which is a pretty big shock here. I'm surprised that Avery is back for Challenge 40, but I'm also kind of happy. Again, I feel like Avery is someone that was kind of taken out of the rotation, despite the fact that she seemed to have a lot of potential. I mean, we saw her kind of get the short end of the stick in her previous appearances, but then obviously recently came back for All Stars 4, and now is on the proper challenge season again, where I'm kind of hoping that she does end up picking a name for herself on this season and ends up becoming a mainstay in the rotation moving forward, because I've always liked Avery. I think it could be a messy presence on this season, to where, again, I'm perfectly fine with her being here. Next up, we got Corey, and again, obviously Corey was going to be here, not a shock, still one of the biggest names in the challenge. Recently had a pretty impressive run on USA 2, to where, straight up, I think Corey's probably one of the biggest threats to win this season, despite the fact that he obviously hasn't won a season up to this point. I feel like he's someone that is kind of poised to do well in the season. I don't really see many people going after Corey. I don't think he's the biggest threat on the board, but was also, like, again, came extremely close to winning USA 2, despite having a massive disadvantage coming into the final, to where Corey is definitely a dark horse pick for this season. I think will be interesting to see. Next up, moving on to Devin, and I mean, obviously Devin was going to be here. Again, one of the bigger modern challenge names, and also another probably decent threat to win, to where I feel like he has been getting better at endurance recently, also pretty good at puzzles and also pretty well ingrained socially, to where Devin's also another threat to win this season. Even though I'm kind of over his shtick, I feel like Devin's the type of person that I liked when he first was on the challenge and liked his role as an underdog, but now as an overdog, he just isn't as interesting. But still, I'm fine with him being here just because obviously he was going to be. With that, we then move on to John A. And I'm very excited to see John A on Challenge 40. Now, straight up, I don't know how it's going to go. I do feel like she probably has a big target on her back. And I've mentioned this before that I don't feel like she's the most suited towards Modern Challenge, even though I think she's, again, very well situated for Challenge All-Stars, a show that's a lot less physical and more so has this focus on like puzzles and social dynamics. I feel like that is in John A's wheelhouse, while I feel like the mainline challenge, if you put her in a really physical elimination, I feel like she's not suited to do the greatest there. But still, I'm excited to see John A here. John A to me is, again, one of the more likable figures in challenge history, to where I think it'll be interesting to see how she does on this season. Next up, another big return, we got Leroy. And obviously Leroy came back for All-Stars 4, but again, really funny to see him back on the mainline show after having announced his retirement in Double Agents. But still, I think it'll be cool to see how he does on this season. Again, I think if Leroy wins this season, that'll be really cool. Again, this cool way to pay off his series-long storyline. But realistically, obviously, there's just so many threats on this season to where I don't know how it's going to go for him. But again, I see a lot of longevity in him. I don't know who's targeting Leroy early on. But again, excited to see Leroy here. I think it should go decently, and he's obviously one of the more likable people in the history of the show. So again, perfectly fine him being here. Next, I'm moving on to Naya, and I do like Naya, though I was kind of surprised at her being here. I feel like she does feel like one of the lesser names on the board, though still someone that obviously made a name for herself in All-Stars 3, and obviously had a much more hectic run her first time around in the challenge. And while World Championship didn't go particularly great, I do feel like she is like kind of developing as a player as we see her, to where I'm not opposed to her being here, though she wasn't someone that was really on my board or someone I was particularly excited to see, but I'm not uninterested in seeing her here either. Next up, moving on to Tony, and Tony's another one. Super excited to see him back on the mainline show. Hasn't been on the mainline show since Final Reckoning, and while he obviously has an appearance on All-Stars 4 coming, he is someone that, again, I'm excited to see on Challenge 40. Again, I think another person that is probably a threat to win. He's obviously someone that has won a Champs Versus season, and beyond that, seemed to be someone that was getting better as he went along in his challenge career, to where I think he's coming into this season as an actual threat to win this season, which I think is pretty cool to see, to where I've always liked Tony. I particularly love his Vendettas run. I feel like that has always been a very notable run on the challenge for me, of him having probably one of the more impressive non-winning games on that season. Where again, Tony's just someone in general I'm pretty excited to see back here. And finally, we're going to end off Era 3 with Tori, because obviously, and the shame is that Tori is a massive threat to win this season. I think she's someone that, while she is coming into this with a lot of enemies, she's obviously someone that if she makes it deep into the season, she's a very likely winner. But I do think this will be interesting in the sense that she's always going to face off against the best of the best. Like, this is the true test of how good Tori actually is. And I think it will be interesting to see her face against a decent amount of adversity and a lot of these bigger names in challenge history, to where, again, at least that will be interesting here, even though I don't particularly like her. But finally, we're getting to Era 4, which is funnily an era that only has one MTV person on the entire board, which obviously makes sense in the fact that obviously the show has stopped casting from MTV in recent years, as MTV just has less shows to cast from anyway. But it is kind of funny, the dichotomy there of eras 1 through 3 being entirely MTV, only for Era 4 to be almost no MTV. But anyway, the alternates here are Big T, which, not shocking, makes a lot of sense that Big T would be in consideration, being a big name in Modern Challenge, though also not shocking that she's not on the proper cast, as again, I just think there's bigger challenge names to go to. The other alternate is a lot more shocking to me, and that person being Fessy. And straight up, I actually do wish Fessy was on this cast. While I don't think Fessy is the most riveting TV, Fessy's obviously someone that does proclaim constantly that he's one of the best challenge competitors ever, and talks about how he's better than all the old school competitors. I think to see him actually face off against those old school competitors would have been cool here. I think to see him face off against the likes of Mark Long and Brad and Derek would have been cool to see. So again, because I am a bit disappointed he's not on the cast, even though again, he's not the most riveting TV. With that, let's talk about the actual people that made the cast. Starting it off with Horacio, and kind of obviously, like, I mean, if Horacio wanted it, he was obviously going to be on. He's one of the biggest names in Modern Challenge. So while he's not the most riveting personality, it obviously makes a lot of sense why he's here. Fan favorite from the last 2 seasons. It makes a lot of sense. And obviously, he's a massive threat to win. If he makes it to the end, he's probably just going to handily win the final. Obviously, the big thing that's holding him back is the fact that he's so bad socially and doesn't try to ingrain himself socially. While he is coming into this with some natural gain allies, I don't feel like he's well poised to go far in this season, where I think people are going to be taking shots at him, but still someone that, again, I'm personally okay with being back here. And next up, moving on to someone that I'm pretty happy to see back, someone that's been in the running for a while, has for some reason been turned down constantly. Though again, on a season of the best, I think it's really cool to see Jenny West here. And Jenny West is someone that had one of the most impressive challenge wins in challenge history, winning in Total Madness. She has not appeared since, despite her still being in incredible shape. Really, I think Jenny is one of the biggest threats to win this season. I don't know who's really going for Jenny on this season. I think she has enough connections while also not being the biggest name on the board to where I think Jenny's definitely a serious threat to win this season. And I think it's just interesting to see her back, even though, again, not the most riveting personality. Next up, moving on to Josh Martinez, who, again, I at least like. Again, I know people get annoyed by Josh. I think Josh is great TV. And again, he's on the upward trajectory. I think he's starting to come to his own challenge-wise, where while he's never a threat to win, I think this is actually a season where he could definitely make the final, even though I think he's also probably very poised to be dragged into elimination if that is a component of this season. But still, Josh is someone that I think will be interesting to see on this season. I think he definitely could bring some good TV. Now, again, I think in terms of a best of the best cast, it is kind of ridiculous that Josh is here, and in that aspect, I would have preferred Fessy on here over Josh, but I still think Josh is good TV, so at least there's that. Next up, moving on to Casey. And obviously, Casey is boring. I don't like Casey as a reality TV personality. She doesn't really bring much to the table. Though, again, if you're doing best of the best, I do think it makes sense to have Casey here. Again, Casey is clearly one of the best female challenge competitors we've ever seen. Very consistently making it deep into the game every single time. The only time she hasn't made the final is because her brother messed it up for her. So we're outside that, again, one of the best challenge competitors we've ever seen. So, again, it makes sense why she's here. Again, she's boring. I don't like her, but it makes sense where for a challenge like this, I don't actually mind that she's here. Next up, moving on to someone that you could definitely tell they're trying to make it to one of the next faces of the show, and that person is Kylan. And straight up, I think Kylan probably took Fessy's spot. I think Kylan is kind of the person that they're now trying to make into the new face of the challenge, to where obviously he has a very good run in Challenge 39. He also has a pretty decent run in USA 1, where, and like, he is a very solid all-around challenge competitor. I do worry for him on this cast where he's kind of the new hotness, and I think through that, would not be shocked at him having a pretty decent target on his back. But still, again, like, I've always liked Kylan as a TV personality. I think he's willing to make big moves, willing to get into fights. So again, I'm perfectly fine with Kylan being here. Makes a lot of sense. Next up, another one that you can clearly tell they're trying to make the face of the challenge. We got Michelle Fitzgerald. And again, like, if we're doing new era, I feel like Michelle Fitzgerald makes a lot of sense. Again, while she did not come off as the most likable in her last appearance, she did completely steamroll that season and has a lot of rivalries coming this season. Also, just in general, being a pretty big name at this point, to where, again, it makes a lot of sense why she's here. Now, I think she's screwed on this season. Again, I think she has so many enemies on this season to where I would not be shocked if she's the first out of this season, but I still think from a general casting perspective, it makes a lot of sense why she's here. So at least her flame out on this season will be kind of interesting to see. Next up, another big name on the board, in my opinion, we got Nerys. I'm very excited to see Nerys back. Again, obviously Challenge 39 was her season, and seeing her back immediately after that is a lot of fun here. Now, I don't know how well it'll go. I don't think this is a cast that is really to her favor, even though, straight up, I think she probably has more connections than you would think, and she's been in the reality TV sphere for years at this point, even before she got on the challenge. So I do think she has decent connections on the board. I just feel like, again, when she's facing off against the best of the best, I don't know if she's the most likely to win a final, but still, obviously proved herself as a competitor on the last season, to where I would be perfectly fine if Nerys becomes one of the new faces of the challenge moving forward. So again, I'm perfectly fine with her being here. Next up, moving on to Olivia. And Olivia is someone that I'm a bit more conflicted on. I feel like Olivia is someone that I just don't know what her place in the challenge necessarily is, where I feel like she's someone that if she really owned her being a villain, I feel like she could be this really cool villain for the show. The problem is that she doesn't, and she plays this like very self-interested game while also trying to be on this moral high ground. I think that's not as interesting to see, though obviously she is coming into this with these built-in rivalries with Horacio, Nerys, and Kylan, while also having connections to some of the older players on the board, where I know she's friends with like Derek Chavez, and obviously he's friends with Anissa, and again, like, it'll be interesting to see her place on this season, to where I'm not opposed to her being back here. I think she's another one that I think could easily become one of the new faces of the challenge, to where, again, it makes a lot of sense why she's on this cast. Next up, moving on to someone I'm personally excited to see back. I've always talked about how I love this person as a challenge personality, even though their last run was definitely a mixed bag, but that person is Paulie Calafiore. And I'm excited to see Paulie back here on a mainline season. Again, we saw him back on USA 2, which did not go great. He's obviously on this bit of a redemption tour, but I'm personally happy to see him on 40. I think it'll be interesting to see how he faces off against the best of the best, but also him being back with Cara Maria and having a lot of his old rivalries on this cast. Like, I think there's a lot of intrigue with having Paulie on this season, to where I'm very interested in seeing how it goes, even though I'm not looking at him as one of the most likely winners on the board. And the final person on the cast of Challenge 40 we have to talk about is Theo, which if this was before World Championship, I would have been really hyped here, though World Championship kind of lessened that hype there, even though he did do extremely well in that season. Again, he made a final. He still was not the most riveting TV there and kind of played the game in a more boring way, to where I think that was obviously underwhelming, but obviously his first two appearances were incredible, to where it was exciting to see him back for that season. And straight up, like, on paper, he's still not a bad choice here. I mean, he's someone that isn't like ingrained in the modern vacation alliance that's been running the show, to where, in my opinion, that's probably one of the biggest benefits of having him on the cast over Fessy, to where I don't mind Theo being here. He's obviously a massive competitor, someone that I think definitely has a shot at winning, to where I think there's a lot to like from Theo's casting choice, even though he was kind of just dull on his last season. But with that, again, that's the entire cast of Challenge 40. Again, one of the most stacked casts in Challenge history. I'm really excited to see this season, where, again, it's surprising for me, where, again, Challenge has been on a downward trajectory recently, where, while I think there were definitely pros to the latest season, I think as a whole, the creative direction of the series has not been in a trajectory that I personally would want it to be. However, this has made me a bit hyped. I mean, this is a season that feels like a celebration of the entire series, something where they're going out of their way to celebrate the entire series, and that's something I at least respect. Like, it gives me very Winners at War vibes and how the show is approaching the season, to where I'm at least excited for that aspect of it. Now, is it gonna suck? Probably. Again, I have no faith in the Challenge production team to actually put together a good season, but at least they're trying within their own parameters, even those parameters are not things I want, but again, they're at least trying. That's something. And even if the season turns out to be bad, at least it'll be interesting from a statistical standpoint to see the best of the best actually facing off against each other. So again, I'm personally still excited in seeing how the season plays out, to where obviously when the season does eventually come out, I will be doing a review of it down the road. Even beyond that, obviously we have All Stars 4 coming up. I'll do a review of that. And beyond that, we have so many other shows going on right now. Survivor 46, BB Can, Amazing Race, Australian Survivor, all those I'll be doing videos on moving forward. And just in general, expect the same typical style of content. But for now, those are my thoughts on the cast of Challenge 40. Thank you for watching.